can't look at what has happened here to your mothers, your fathers, your grandparents, sons, daughters, children, even babies, and not scream out for justice. Justice must be done. But I caution this: while you feel that rage, don't be consumed by it. After 9/11, we were enraged in the United States. While we sought justice and got justice, we also made mistakes.
President Biden there delivering powerful remarks in Israel. He reiterated the United States' unwavering support for the country in a speech this morning in Tel Aviv. And this is the first time the president hinted at Israel showing some form of restraint over Gaza after likening Hamas's attack to the equivalent for them of 15 9/11s. His remarks come a day after a deadly explosion at a hospital in Gaza. Health officials say this blast killed hundreds of people. Palestinian authorities blame Israel. However, Israel blames a Palestinian militant group, saying this was the result of an errant rocket. More than 4,700 people have died on both sides of this conflict since this phase of this war began, and that figure includes 31 Americans. CBS News reporter Haley Ott joins us from Tel Aviv, Israel, with more. Haley, you were actually in the room while President Biden gave this key address in Tel Aviv. What was that like, considering he wasn't just showing support for Israel, but also saying that aid needs to reach Palestinians?
It was a really interesting speech because, as you say, President Biden expressed his unwavering support for Israel and took a long time talking about his fondness for the country and the way that the United States would support Israel no matter what. But then he also really offered substantive changes, different things than we've heard before, especially in terms of humanitarian aid. He said that during a meeting before he gave his address, he had actually negotiated with Israel's war cabinet to allow for aid to be allowed through Egypt into Gaza. As you know, we've been waiting. Aid has been piling up on that border between Egypt and Gaza, waiting to be let in, and it hasn't been. President Biden said that he had been assured by Israel that aid would be allowed in, humanitarian aid, as long as it was not for Hamas militants. And shortly after his statement, Israel put out their own statement where they said that they would not prevent aid from entering into Egypt as long as it was food, water, or medicine, and it was not for Hamas.
Speak to us more about that statement, Haley, because we know that the Israeli position since Hamas launched the cross-border attack and took hostages is that it didn't want to allow aid into Gaza because it may reach Hamas militants and they want to get their hostages back before agreeing to let aid in. So what did you make of that post-Biden speech statement by the Israeli government?
The Israelis have been taking a tough stance. Obviously, they have. They have a lot of skin in the game. And so they said, after the president made his speech, that they would not be allowing aid through their border with Gaza unless the hostages were released. But in the statement, they did say that they wouldn't prevent the aid from coming in through that Rafah crossing, which is what's been happening before. That crossing has not been opened for days since this conflict has really escalated and since the airstrikes have been raining down on Gaza. We know that civilians have been flocking to that crossing in the hopes of finding safety. Many with foreign passports have been hoping that they'd be able to get out through that crossing. And there are truckloads on the other side of aid, of food and water and medicine, which is desperately needed in Gaza at the morning, that it has been waiting to get in. So there has been a sort of standoff. And I think what we can see is that the president made it clear that he had really communicated how important it was for that aid to be allowed into Gaza and that the Israelis were responsive.
The hospital attack, well, can you call it an attack? The blast at a hospital in Gaza City yesterday that we were covering at about this time has really inflamed the situation. There were protests in Arab countries, in Amman, Jordan, for example, where there was supposed to be the Biden meeting with other Arab leaders. The blame, though, is being pointed in both directions. What can you tell us at this stage, based on Israeli intelligence, U.S. intelligence, as to what is believed to have led to that blast?
Yes, the explosion at the hospital, which has reportedly killed around 500 people, although even that is being questioned at this point, really changed the game ahead of Biden's visit. Initially, he was planning to go to Jordan, where he was going to meet with leaders from Egypt, from Jordan. He was going to meet with the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, and all of that was canceled when this explosion happened, which meant that part of his diplomatic effort, part of the reason for this trip, fell away, and all of a sudden he was only traveling to Israel and only meeting with the Israeli government. And we learned a bit about what the United States, what their intelligence said about that explosion. They reiterated what the Israelis have said, which is they believe that based on what they've seen, the explosion was caused by an errant rocket, Biden said, fired by a militant group inside Gaza. That is what the Israelis said shortly after the explosion occurred. And obviously that is not the same thing that many are saying happened. Many are saying that that explosion was caused by an Israeli airstrike. So far, we have intelligence from different governments, but there will need to be an independent investigation into this explosion, and that is incredibly difficult, as it's difficult to access the site.
Yeah, all right. We appreciate the update. Haley Ott joining us from Tel Aviv. All right, let's bring in CBS News chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett to speak about the issues around Israel, what's happening in the House of Representatives right now ahead of your America Decides program this evening. How much of an achievement from your view is this announcement of not just support for Israel and emphasizing that from President Biden, but aid to Gaza as well?
Well, it is significant in the sense that the United States government, through the President of the United States, is doing its level best to achieve two things at once. And that's very difficult sometimes to make happen in the Middle East. One, side with America's longstanding ally, Israel, and provide whatever military assistance it needs and backing for whatever military maneuvers Israel decides are necessary to protect itself and respond to the terrorist attack launched by Hamas on October 7th. At the same time, try to separate the Hamas terrorists who led that assault on October 7th from the Palestinians who live in Gaza itself, and to show sympathy for them and try to build a means by which aid and some aspect of humanitarian relief can reach Gaza without them departing. Why is this an important issue? Because many of the Arab leaders looking at this situation do not want the Palestinians to flee Gaza. Why? Because they fear, and there's some historical precedent for this, if they flee to another place, such as Egypt, they may never be allowed to return. And so the idea of keeping the Palestinian civilians there who live there, provide aid and comfort as possible without having them to relocate, is not only a priority of Arab nations and those watching this very closely, it is for those throughout the Arab world who are sympathetic with the Palestinians, and something that the United States is trying to achieve, as it also backs up Israel. And to say this yet again, and it's a constant theme throughout all American diplomacy in the Middle East, and I started covering that when I started covering the White House in the year 2000, it's difficult to make both sides happy or to persuade both sides that you are equally interested in their both medium and long-term and even short-term interests. But the president is trying to achieve that.
Yeah, to say the least. And Major, on that point, I want to get your view on the timeline of events, because when Israel gave the 24-hour warning late last week to those in Gaza City to flee, you then had a diplomatic flurry and some nations, including the U.S., encouraging Israel not to do that. Then you had the announcement of Joe Biden heading to Israel, the U.S. president. Then we had this hospital attack almost as the president is en route, and Mahmoud Abbas leaving what was meant to be a summit of Arab leaders. How much did the hospital attack and the blame both ways complicate what was already challenging?
Complicated it to a very great deal, even though it is very hard to discern. The United States intelligence is developing its own information. Israelis have made representations that this did not happen because they did it. It's not only a fog of war situation, but it is one that is being instantly and was instantly propagandized by both sides. That is cold comfort to those who suffered either death or injury as a result of this blast at a Palestinian hospital. That a blast occurred is not in dispute. The cause of that is, but the damage done is real, and it reverberated intimately in the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas, who has a very difficult, and that's putting it mildly, relationship with Hamas, essentially ejected from Gaza by Hamas. They consider each other rivals, even though it is the Palestinian Authority led by Mahmoud Abbas, that it is the negotiating partner, such as there are negotiations or any talks at all, either between the Israelis or the Americans or any other entity trying to calm things down or at least de-escalate the current wave of violence in the region. And many Arab leaders said, look, this thing is being put together hastily. Now there is this situation with the hospital. All of the situations underneath it are too confused and too combustible to have a productive set of talks. But back to that timeline. Much of the world was very much nervous that the Israelis were going to go in to Gaza late this weekend. Then came the invitation from the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the American president. And the White House decided, look, the sooner we get there, the more we can have direct talks and for sure forestall that expected ground invasion, because there was no possible way the Israelis were going to launch that ground invasion while the President of the United States was either flying to or in Israel. Never going to happen. And there'll probably be some period of time after Biden leaves before this is undertaken, if it's undertaken at all. So there was this tremendous sense of diplomatic effort to slow the Israelis down, make sure whatever they're planning, they plan it well, but not do it while the American president was there. What comes in the next couple, 3 days? I think having lived through the last 72 hours, we all know that is impossible to predict.
And let me just, in our last few moments, ask you about a topic domestically. I know that on America Decides tonight, you're speaking with Tennessee Republican Congressman Mark Green, the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee. We don't have a speaker now. There's been a second failed vote.
Yep.
What are the consequences of this from a national security point of view?
Very basically, without a House of Representatives, there can be no action on a unified basis to legislate anything. If the United States Congress and the President of the United States want to assist Israel or Ukraine or any other entity, without a House of Representatives, nothing happens. The Senate can start some legislative work, but until there's a fully functioning House, it's at a standstill. And not only did Jim Jordan fail in a second attempt to become the Speaker of the House, he lost ground. He had 20 votes against him yesterday, had 23 against him today. That is not what momentum looks like. And it is very clear that Jim Jordan is not only losing momentum, but may have to withdraw. And if he withdraws, then who is the next possible Speaker of the House? The idea that this is now becoming not permanent, but a prolonged state of dysfunction, disarray, and the word that Republicans keep using, chaos, is now ever present. And I know many in our audience are like, just wake me up when we have a speaker. I'd like to, but I can't.
Don't sleep. Major Garrett, thank you very much. And folks,
Thanks.
need to tune in to America Decides tonight at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on CBS News. Now we want to bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang for more on President Biden's trip to Israel and the White House's reaction, of course, to what continues to unfold there. Weijia, President Biden en route back to the U.S., but after making a point that the U.S. will stand by Israel to ensure that it's a safe place for Jewish people. How will the administration make that happen, considering the ways in which things are unraveling?
Well, the administration has already taken several steps to try to fulfill this promise, including the aid package by the Pentagon, moving 2 aircraft carriers to the region. One is already there in the Eastern Mediterranean. Another is on its way with the capacity each to carry 60 warships. Of course, there's also 2,000 U.S. troops who are on heightened alert at the ready to provide support if needed to the IDF. Now, to be clear, that is not for combat. That would just be for intelligence and logistical and communication support. So they are on standby. And today, Errol, during his remarks in Tel Aviv, the president said that later this week he was going to ask Congress for an unprecedented aid package for Israel. And sources familiar with the request tell me that that is for $10 billion. And we also know that it is going to be baked into a broader aid package that will add up to about $100 billion that will include aid not only for Israel, but Ukraine and Taiwan, as well as border security. Now, I should say that the details are still being worked out and nothing is final, but the package is starting to take form. And again, the president plans to ask Congress for that money. But as we just have been reporting, as you've been reporting all morning, Errol, without a functioning Congress and a Speaker of the House, it's kind of moot what the administration asks for because you can't even get the votes, a vote count on whether the aid will be approved. Right. But we are getting ahead of ourselves now. The point is that the president is considering this massive package, and a big part of that will be for emergency aid for Israel.
Yeah, Weijia, you make a very good point. I want to also ask you then about aid for Palestinian hospitals. I think the president mentioned $100 million. But as we know, Biden's agenda was shortened and abridged because Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority pulled out so he can get back to the West Bank. How can the U.S. assure that the money they're pledging for Palestinians will make it to those innocent civilians and not militants, which is Israel's fear?
Errol, this is such an important question because you really hit on what was supposed to be a key part of the president's trip to the Middle East. When we asked the White House, why now? Why now? Why does the president feel like he has to go in this moment? The answer was largely because he wanted to have FaceTime with those Arab leaders. Because, of course, even though he does plan to take calls with those leaders who he was supposed to meet in person, the presidents of Egypt and Jordan, that's not the same as face-to-face diplomacy. And he wanted to be able to leave there with an agreement to open up the humanitarian corridor to allow civilians, including Americans, out of Gaza and to allow humanitarian aid in. So even though he has made this pledge, Errol, the issue right now is when that corridor will be open, because it's the only way to accomplish those two things. And as of right now, Egypt has not totally signed on. They thought they were almost there over the weekend. They put out an alert for all Americans to get to that crossing as soon as possible. And then the deal fell through because Egypt has a lot of security concerns. So, Errol, even though that money has been committed, we still have to see how this unfolds, because not only is Egypt a major player in this, but Israel, and of course they are worried about Hamas, which the administration tells me is another roadblock because they are making it difficult to have access to that corridor. Errol?
Yeah, it's a great breakdown, Weijia, of all the different nations and entities and moving pieces of what is a complicated and, of course, emotional crisis. Thank you for that update from the White House.
You're welcome.